Good afternoon, everyone. With Chinese infrastructure and investment so heavy across Africa, you need to ask yourself why. Chinese history is long and varied, thousands of years of dynasties rising and declining. And what you'll find is the collapse of Chinese dynasties are always during solar minimums. And with Chinese explorers and trade routes for the last 2,000 years crisscrossing Central Asia, parts of the Middle East, there would be a lot of connected information of what's happening on one side of the planet climatically compared to what would be happening in China at the exact same time. So with this compiled thousands of years of information of climatic data in the Chinese records, they know something and they are preparing for new food production areas. Let's take a look and see what the strategy of food production will be for China as the new solar minimum intensifies, taking off crop production areas in northern China and how they plan to substitute that for feeding their people to avoid another collapse. Chinese dynasties can be traced back as far as 3000 BC. We're going to take a look at the last 1,000 years. This is a list of the different dynasties that have come and gone. Mainly they disappear because of drought, famine, and civil unrest due to food production losses. I overlapped here the Chinese dynasties with the solar minimums along a temperature reconstruction off of Greenland ice cores. As you can see, there's a nice correlation between the famines, droughts, and civil upheaval caused by loss of food production that does match up with the solar minimums. Taking a glimpse back in time, circa 200 BC, the Silk routes started. This would take you through Central Asia, and as it did, the explorers and traders would have known what was happening climatically along through these routes in Central Asia as well as to Africa, India, and the Middle East. From that point forward, with meticulous records, they could report back to the emperor of the dynasty of the time what was happening thousands of miles away climatically compared to what was happening in China. Now, there's been a lot of exploration from China during this time. The voyage of Zhenghe was one of the most famous. From 1405 to 1422, you can see the level of exploration along the different coastlines, including Africa. This is a nice Chinese map here that I dug up. Shows the same routes, but with a little more detail on the exact voyage. And further back from that as well, Emperor Wu dispatched Jiang Qian to take a look through Central Asia. Of course, climatic records would have been kept and reported back. This is a temperature reconstruction from Tibet to show you exactly what I mean. The temperatures seem to have an inverse relationship. Where the red circles are, where it's high in Tibet, there's actually a cold pattern happening in the lowlands across in China. It's an inverse. Of course, somebody would have reported this back. They would have known that when it gets cold in the mainland, further down along the coastal areas, it gets warm and stays warmer up in Tibet. And then you need to ask yourself, how many other instances of physical localities would this comparison have been done over thousands, plural, of years? A quick glimpse into Chinese history here. The Yuan dynasty, there was a 40-year drought. This was during the Wolf minimum. The fall of the Ming dynasty, natural calamities, that included famines. That was right in the Maunder minimum. The Qing Empire as well. Northern Chinese famine during the 1870s, that matches up with the Dalton minimum. And if we go a step further back into the Song dynasty, we have the Southern Song and the Northern Song, Bei Song and Nan Song. Now they also collapsed because of a temperature drop, and this ushered in the Mongol invasions. The Jin dynasty was a few years before that, and there was a massive drop of 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius during that time. And what does that actually mean? Well, look here at the Canadian tree line. During the Little Ice Age versus today, you can see how much more north today's tree line is, which means it's much warmer and those trees can extend further north. But that's several hundred miles further south during the minimums. So imagine crop production would also be scaled back that far as well. This is a conditional shift. Depending on a 1-degree drop, you can see how the agricultural areas would need to shift further south. And Canadian agriculture responses A 1 degree Celsius drop reduces the frost-free period by 15 days. 2 degrees would not even allow the crops to ripen before the next frost. So can you imagine a 3-degree drop, what it would do? A temperature construction of the little ice age, as you can see in China, across northern Asia, Europe, and the United States, all affected. In today's modern world, that's exactly where we grow our grains, including corn, soybeans, and wheat. A jump into the China corn production, as you can see, far north in Heilongjiang, these areas at the far northern region are going to be affected, as well as the soybean production. Major growing areas are the darkest green. Those will be taken offline within the next 5 to 10 years. Wheat growing areas as well, overlapping the corn growing belt. Now, one thing about China, they're on a 100-year plan. In United States, on a 4-year plan, or whoever is in office for 4 years or 8 years. But the Chinese are planning 100 years ahead. Which brings us to the ghost towns and ghost cities. If they need to relocate quite a few people in the northern regions of China, these cities are already set up for population migration. Notice a lot of them are along coastal areas. The sea waters will remain a little bit warmer than the air temperatures, which will also heat those cities and not allow as much ice and frost, which would be conducive for survival. Taking a look back at the mega lakes in the Sahara Desert 7,000 years before now. Yes, lakes in the deserts of northern Africa that are now just barren, dry sand. Which brings me back to my first point, the infrastructure across Africa that the Chinese are financing so heavily. They're mainly in northern Africa, Central Africa, including rail lines to nowhere, 6-lane express highways to nowhere, just cutting through and crisscrossing the deserts. If, with their climatic information over the last few thousand years, they know that this area will start to receive rainfall and become a growing area again when their northern wheat and corn production goes offline, they could actually use these areas to substitute. And you'll notice with China's worldwide reach, the most investment is in Africa at $119 billion. And that's only for the year 2013. There's also ghost cities popping up around in Angola. Chinese finance, Chinese built. Quilamba City. Here's a view from the air so you can see what it looks like. Now, being able to grow food in a single area does not mean anything unless you can transport it back to another area. Now, this is the string of pearls, a coin phrase that strictly means it's just a geopolitical network of Chinese military and commercial facilities, ports, etc. along sea lines that allow direct delivery back to the Chinese mainland that extends from the port of Sudan through Sittwe in Myanmar with rail links and oil pipes directly back into Yunnan province, thereby avoiding the Malacca Straits. When we jump into Sittwe, this was a major project by the Chinese to deliver all Western manufactured goods overland through Myanmar to the new megaport. Firstly, avoiding all the long transportation routes and costs associated with Western production moving it out to the East Coast ports. And B, faster and closer delivery to Africa. And then C, also avoiding the Malacca Straits, which the United States military controls. This is a better look, simpler look at the string of pearls in the maritime Silk Road from Africa through Pakistan at Gwadar, through Sri Lanka and Colombo, all the way up into Chittagong in Bangladesh, Sittwe in Myanmar. And you can see there's a concerted effort by China to pre-plan in advance. They know something we do not, or they are not putting out into the media, either Chinese government, Western governments. They know the climate's going to get cold. They know for sure crop production is going to be affected. Chinese are planning in advance to have some sort of food production and food delivery system in place. What are our governments doing to prepare for this? Thanks for watching. Hope you got something out of the video. If the Chinese are preparing at this level for food production losses in their country in the northern areas, you might want to think about preparing something yourselves at the local level with your communities and your neighbors.